Marie Killick made the first ever call to the Samaritans. She was a talented engineer whose invention should have made her millions. Instead, she died penniless and broken by the system, and her children are still looking for answers.
She should have won. We should have got our damages. And I feel very bitter and angry the fact that it killed my mother.
I think it was a shocking episode in British corporate history. But I think more to the point, it was a damning comment on how ineffective the courts can be.
If you come up with a sound idea, be very careful who you tell. Tonight we go back to the 50s and investigate how one Brighton woman took on a corporate giant, won her case, but never received a penny in damages. She invented the Sapphire Stylus for record players. And what of today's inventors? Will a so-called gem of an idea see you rich or ripped off?
Hard to believe that that little thing caused so much trouble.
This is a Killick family. 51 years ago, their mother invented a Sapphire Stylus for record players. It's 30 years since they last saw this object of desire. Marie Killick should have made millions of pounds for her young family with her invention of the everlasting gramophone stylus for record players. Instead, she died penniless. Her children's childhood was a nightmare of high-profile court cases, evictions, poverty, and ultimately bankruptcy.
Her invention was quite radical in the sense that she was using a precious stone which is actually cut in a certain way that it rested gently in a groove and it wouldn't damage.
Decca made an offer for her stylus in 1946. And they offered her £750,000 and a consultancy in their business because she would still have a certain amount of control with the marketing. But she was, this was her baby, so to speak.
Her baby was thriving. Then, without warning, her sales began to fall away. Sitting in her dining room, Marie Killick pored over documents which showed her invention was being copied by the massive pie company.
She put the patent up for sale to test the market, and one of Pie's employees attended the meeting and admitted to her that Pie were infringing it. But of course, and they were a millionaire company, they could settle, they said. So mother went to her solicitor, obviously, and started proceedings.
Marie Killick had total confidence in this piece of paper. She believed this patent was all the legal defense she needed to save her dying business. A hard lesson was about to begin.
A patent is a piece of paper that gives you a monopoly right for up to 20 years in the UK. However, you have to police that yourself. There is no entity that's going to look after you. So if you find that your patent's been infringed, you then have to sue the infringer. And of course that can be a very expensive process.
Little has changed in 40 years. By taking legal action, the Killick family had embarked on a very expensive journey.
They're not going to get away with this.
When I was very young, at the beginning, my mother had a business at Isha. It was just a normal, happy family life, really, plenty of money. We had a governess and mother had a chauffeur.
Marie Louise Killick was born in 1918. As a young girl, she decided to pursue a career in engineering, not exactly a common profession for a woman in the 1930s.
One has to go back to the time. She was quite unusual in the sense she was a professional scientist, B, she was a woman, and in those days women basically stayed at home, the kitchen sink.
Not this woman. She wanted to improve the quality of sound reproduction. Armed with her patent, she believed British justice would prove she invented the Sapphire Stylus and not Pye. She was determined to have her day in court, and she did, with disastrous consequences.
I do remember constantly looking across at the opposition and to see how they were taking it, and when the judge upheld the fact that they had infringed Mother's invention, it's just a wonderful feeling of, well, sort of bubbles coming out of the top of your head almost. There was a sort of anticlimax after you got the judgment and you think marvellous, and then you realise, because Mother told us that there was a possibility that Pye would appeal, and which of course they did, and so you knew you had to go through it all again.
Look, we've won. Try and get that into your head. Pye lost, we won, as simple as that.
It was 1957, and the Killicks had won round 1 in a costly legal battle. The appeal court hearing was still to come.
Pye will go for an appeal.
Our life changed totally from the happy, secure home life that we had with our mother to moving from pillar to post, as Mother used to say, and we certainly did that, to having total insecurity, really, as children, because Mother still tried to fulfil her role as a mother, but battle on against this big combine, and life was hell for us at times.
Publicly, the family presented a confident face, but their mother was a single parent with 4 children to feed. Cynthia and Dawn were in their middle teens, with Nigel then aged 9 and Christina just 4. Privately, circumstances were getting desperate.
We were unable to get into the house. There were no services. There was no electric, no gas, which in fact they had been cut off because Mother was unable to pay the bills. And I remember barbecuing in the garden.
As the bills mounted, the family were forced to move into a basement flat at Royal Crescent in Brighton. Although some of the family still lives in Brighton, this is the first time they've been able to revisit the scene of some very difficult times.
I do remember at Royal Crescent in Brighton, which is where we were living when Mother won her judgment, that things were very, very tough. And we used to sit at the kitchen table with files, and we'd be filing the half pennies to go into the electric meter so that we could have light.
Eventually, the day of the court appeal arrived. The family's fate rested on whether 3 men thought the tip of this needle was unique to Marie Killick.
You're very aware this time there are 3 judges sitting up there, and that you're very dependent on what they say is the outcome of how you're going to be feeling at the end of the day. But it was, and even in a way, it was an even more wonderful feeling, because that was, we felt sure, in fact, in the court they'd said they weren't going to go to the House of Lords, so that was it. The battle had been won.
The battle had been won. Victory at last. She'd won the first case and then the appeal. Suddenly, the world wanted to know all about Mrs. Killick, the millionairess in waiting.
Well, I mean, I just couldn't believe that it was all over. It was wonderful, and I thought at last, and Mother was so ill. I thought at last perhaps she'd get better now, and things would get back to normal. Although I think we'd almost forgotten what normality was, really.
Marie Killick believed Pye owed her royalties on every stylus they'd sold, but Pye was slow to reach for the chequebook. The weeks stretched into months with no sign of any damages.
Patience, patience, my darlings.
The Killick case made legal history. In law, she won. In reality, she lost everything. This man has studied the Killick case for many years. He has an affidavit testifying that Marie Killick was approached by a company acting for Pye and asked to manufacture styli as a subcontractor.
In the case of Pye, they cleverly ensured that the only available records of manufacture of the styli which infringed Marie's patent were Pye records, not those of Pye's subsidiaries or subcontractors.
Pye said they owed her less than £4,000. Marie Killick said the figure ran to millions. In the end, it didn't matter who was right in law. Unfortunately, the court never got round to dealing with the level of damages.
Well, she discovered that Pye were manufacturing her invention, and they were manufacturing to such a quantity that they couldn't keep up, and they were subcontracting it out, and she was asked to manufacture her own stylus for this company of $20,000 a week to start with.
Her courtroom victory was flashed around the world. Headlines proclaimed her a millionairess. The fight for the Killick family should have been over. It wasn't.
I was already married, and I just wanted to try and keep this sort of normality of my own life. Just normal little life, you know, and try and forget it, I suppose.
I tell you, if I see the inside of another solicitor's office, I think I'm going to go mad.
Well, it seemed to me that we'd been sort of thrown back, as though there hadn't been any judgments, you know, that we were again on the path of struggle to put mother to put a roof over our heads and food on the table. Things had just taken... we were back in the nightmare, and in fact, in many ways, it was worse.
Letters of support and offers to buy her patent poured in from all over the world. The only thing missing was a cheque from Pye. Everyone thought they were rich. The reality was different. Initially, shops fought to offer credit to this millionaire family. Now, they wanted to be paid. The name Killick became notorious in Brighton society.
We had to change our names, because they recognised you couldn't use the name Killick, because as soon as you said Killick, once the case had been, and it had all been advertised in the paper, everybody knew the name of Killick, especially in Brighton.
Mummy just suddenly said, "Your name isn't Killick, your name is Wood. And you spell it W-O-O-D." And I remember going off in the car and being in fear of would I remember how to spell this name. And I was going W-O-O-D, W-O-O-D.
Believing everyone was against her, Marie Killick had a habit of recording meetings with her lawyers. This recording of Marie Killick's voice has not been heard by anyone since it was made in 1958.
Every instrument that they have manufactured and sold by subcontract, contract, we have evidence of this, of course, I am entitled to the profit that they made on each instrument. Now that is going to take time.
By now, the family were destitute. They'd moved constantly and were deep in debt. In desperation, Marie became the first person to ring the Samaritans. Cynthia remembers that call to the founder, Dr. Chad Vara.
They had only just been created, and she had seen the poster in the telephone box, and she was desperate. Yet again, we were having to move on. She'd just given birth 6 weeks before to her youngest child, and we were being evicted, I believe, and she rang him in desperation, and he said, "Hold everything, don't move, I'm coming straight round in a taxi."
The family were now constantly on the move. There was a glimmer of hope, however, in the shape of a £25,000 deal that Marie was busy negotiating with a foreign bank. What she needed was more time. Just when it seemed there might be a way out, Marie received an urgent call from her solicitors.
She gets a phone call from Mr. Penny to say that she must come back to Brighton to attend her creditors' meeting. She got a draft agreement from the bank director to say that they were negotiating this £25,000 deal.
This was an attempt to declare her bankrupt. If it succeeded, the big money deal was off, and she would lose everything.
It's a rigged bankruptcy.
She stood up and waved the document and said, "I've got here a document that is enabling me to get £25,000 to, in fact, I'm given a few more days to fly back to Paris and conclude the deal." But the creditors, the committee of creditors, voted to have her declared bankrupt.
That's what happened. Although Pye was not a creditor, the company offered £4,000 to settle her debts on condition that this would be in full and final settlement of her claim against Pye. Marie Killick said no. The official receiver said yes. Her case was dead.
I think it was a shocking episode in British corporate history. But I think more to the point, it was a damning comment on how ineffective the courts can be. I think we should recall that the judge in the Killick case, Lloyd Jacob, was appalled when he found out exactly what the consequences of his rulings had been.
Marie Killick died in 1964. In 1967, Pi was bought out. The new company told us they have no access to what happened in the 50s, but find it inconceivable that Pi should have misled the High Court and later the Court of Appeal when they declared they'd only made 50,000 products. It's the 40th anniversary this year of Killick versus Pi, and it still stands as a landmark case in the annals of invention. It would be good to think such stories are now a thing of the past, but it would seem nothing could be further from the truth. James Dyson has made millions from his invention, but like Marie Killick, his success could so easily have turned to disaster. His idea was for a bagless vacuum cleaner with better sucking power, and now sales at home and abroad are booming. So in the early days were the big boys in industry happy to see someone with good ideas knocking on their door.
I wrote to Hoover and asked them if they'd like to see it, and they sent me a letter which they wanted me to sign, which said that anything that came out of a conversation between Hoover and I would belong to Hoover. Now I felt that was fundamentally unfair, because after all I was going along with my idea, and anything that occurred in the conversation would be about my idea and might even be my suggestion. So I said I'd come along, but I needed that clause deleted, but they wouldn't have that, so Hoover never saw it in the early days.
Reflecting on the one that got away, Hoover recently suggested what would have happened had Dyson signed that piece of paper.
Mike Rutter of Hoover has said on a television programme that with hindsight he wished he had got hold of their technology and put it on the shelf so nobody could have it, which is a quite outrageous remark for someone to make.
So they would have taken your idea and done nothing with it?
Yes, he evidently doesn't want the public to be able to buy a Dyson. He'd much rather they bought a Hoover and bought bags to make Hoover rich. So he would, if he had had the opportunity and the foresight, he would have got hold of my invention and not allowed the public to have it.
So, if you have a good idea, what next?
The crucial mistake that everybody makes, of course, if you invent something, you want to tell everybody about it, and that's the last thing you should do. Because if you have something that's patentable, you must apply for the correct intellectual property rights, the protection to protect your idea, before you do anything else, and certainly before you tell anybody else.
John Godfrey from Hamble in Hampshire has legally protected his idea with a patent, but he won't be taking his invention anywhere near big business.
Well, as you can see, Pugo is a walking stick style. When your dog's done his business, just present the jaws, open with the trigger, present the jaws, close it down over the poo, and there you are, you have it.
Experience has shown him that plagiarism is alive and well in many companies, which is why his manufacturing plant remains firmly inside the garden shed.
They look at you and say, well, oh, Mr. Godfrey, we've thought of that. In fact, we've got drawings of that in our safe. You know, I'm sorry, nothing doing. And off you go with your tail between your legs. And they whip down into the workshop and knock something up, which is really quite simple. And the next few months later, you see your idea on the market, marketed by somebody else.
The lush grass can harbour all sorts of surprises. If you want to be a responsible dog owner, you may like to dispose of the offending article with a certain degree of dignity. Addressing the owner's embarrassment coupled with an eco-friendly product, and John Godfrey could well be onto a winner. All he now needs is someone with venture capital to really clean up in the poo business.
You go into a bank and say you've got a little invention here, or to anybody really, you're a little bit of a weirdo for a start off. You're not really quite one of the real people of the world. You're tended to be laughed at a little bit. Why, I don't know, because everything we use has been invented at one time or another.
We are a nation of inventors, but not investors, especially when it comes to new technology. Southampton man Pat Falvey is keen to move his idea out of the bedroom, if only big business would show some interest.
It's a little black box that fits on the back of a hat, and it emulates a mouse for a computer. It basically, you unplug the mouse from your computer, plug this device in, and then the cursor on the screen, instead of tracking your hand movements, it now tracks your head movements. So therefore, by looking around the screen, the cursor follows your eyes. As you can see, the cursor's following my head movements. We move across to the light and on. As you can see, I'm now using it to control the blind. The blind moves up and down in synchronization with my head movements.
He now needs the nod from those with money to invest. One Brighton business has foreign customers queuing up for this technology. In Britain, no one's interested.
It takes spaces to people instead of people to spaces. I can take this camera, which you've seen, into an environment, record it 360 degrees, 3D, take that space, and somebody somewhere else can experience that space.
Having captured the view from 360 degrees, the film is then loaded into a pair of binoculars. Someone, anywhere, can look at this same view. When they turn to the right, they see the view to the right. Turn left, and you see the view to the left. It would make a surveyor's job a lot easier.
This country is a very, very difficult country to market new concepts. Great deal of interest in America, but Japan particularly, where I've signed a contract for the supply of £1.2 million worth of effectively British camera technology to Japan. Unfortunately, I can't make them because I can't get funding to manufacture that. So it may answer some of the questions you may have about the state of our economy.
A growth industry has developed whereby companies will offer to take your idea and sell it to big business. However, the service doesn't come cheap, so it's best to proceed with caution.
I could tell you here and now that your invention is the best thing since sliced bread, and really what we need to do is do a market survey for you, and that's only going to cost you £3,000. Well, you're wasting your money.
Money is the key word if you're a would-be inventor. Luckily, James Dyson had plenty of it when the giant American corporation Amway ignored his patent for the bagless vacuum cleaner and copied it. Unlike Marie Killick, he had the money to take the corporate giant to court and win, but only just. They copied your idea quite blatantly.
They copied it blatantly.
And they didn't expect you would sue.
I think they thought I was far too small to sue them. And of course I was. And I only managed to sue them through licensing my technology in Japan and to other companies in the US. And because I then had a royalty income and a design income, I could afford just about to fight the lawsuit.
Annually, 40,000 patents are granted in the UK, of which only 2% will make money. Protecting your idea worldwide could set you back £50,000.
If somebody's got £1,000 to invest in a patent, then actually think about going and buying £1,000 worth of lottery tickets. You've got about the same chance of success.
Little divides some of today's inventors and the Marie Killick of the 1950s. If someone copies your idea, you need cash in abundance to fight through the courts. Then, as now, a patent is worthless unless you have money. Marie Killick was beaten by the system, and the bitterness of what happened is still with the family.
They took my mother away from me, and I just always feel that when she walked out of the court, when she had her judgment in 1958, as far as I'm concerned, they may as well put a gun to her head then. And I think it would almost have been less traumatic than watching her suffer and the suffering that it caused all the family.